Nigeria's gross domestic product grew by 3.84% in real terms in Q4 2024, up from 3.4% in 2023, marking the strongest expansion in 3 years, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. The services sector, which expanded by 5.37%, played a key role, contributing 57.38% to the GDP. However, agriculture slowed to 1.76% from 2.1% in Q4 2023, while industry growth dipped by 2% from 3.86%. For 2024, Nigeria's overall GDP growth stood at 3.40%, reflecting sustained recovery and resilience despite global economic uncertainties. So to help us make sense of this, I'm being joined by Tajudeen Ibrahim, who is Director, Research and Strategy at Chapel Hill Denham Securities Limited. Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim, for joining us. Of course, you just listen to the statistics that I just rolled out, but then when we ask the question, is Nigeria's economy really growing?
So in actual sense, the Nigerian economy is growing. It is just that the growth is not even when we take a look at it from a sector standpoint. It is also that, we have some policies in place that are, somewhat underpinned economic growth. And so in summary, the economy is growing. Nevertheless, I recognize the fact that we still have, some subsectors of the economy which are still, somewhat struggling, or which are still recording negative growth. But, in summary, the Nigerian economy is growing.
We're going to look at some of the sectors, but then let me refer you back to the IMF when it revised Nigeria's economic growth for 2024 upward from 2.9% to 3.1%. But according to the NBS, the GDP grew by 3.84% year-on-year in Q4 2024, while overall growth reached 3.4%. So economists are asking the question, how did Nigeria surpass international expectations?
I think really what we should be looking at is the non-oil sector of the Nigerian economy, because that is where we saw the strongest growth over the past 8 consecutive quarters. With the sector growing by 3.96%, that growth is reflective of the strong performance of the non-oil sector. And in this case, we have the likes of, consumer businesses. We have the likes of, cement manufacturing businesses also. The likes of them, recording somewhat, strong growth. Some businesses in those sectors, recorded strong growth in the final, quarter of last year. Also partly because it was a festive period. One would expect, those activities to, to rise on the back of festivity. But when we look at the oil sector growth somewhat, slowed down to about 1.48% in the final quarter. So which means that the major driver, remained the non-oil sector, and Nigeria was able to outperform expectations, largely because we had policies that I believe were supportive of economic growth. If we look at FX, for instance, FX, that is exchange rate, was, broadly speaking, stable in the final quarter of last year. And that's, to my mind, underpinned the ability of foreign exchange users, particularly those that have to import raw materials to produce goods. They were able to tap into the market on the back of an improvement in the foreign exchange market in terms of liquidity flows. So I believe that also somewhat played an important role, because when we started last year, up until the 3rd quarter of last year, nobody really thought that Nigeria's currency could turn the corner positively, and we would see an improvement in liquidity. But I think the CBN really did a very good job around ensuring that we had an improvement in foreign currency liquidity in the final quarter of last year. I think, largely speaking, that underpinned the economic growth that we saw for the final quarter of last year.
Okay, so when we put these measures into context, both the fiscal and monetary policies and this growth that we're seeing, how sustainable are the measures and, of course, the numbers that we are seeing looking at the economy?
So the sustainability, to my mind, is largely speaking dependent on, number one, what we see around, price stability over the next, couple of quarters, because price stability is very important for you to ensure that, consumers, purchasing power is not, watered down. The second thing that price stability is important is that you would see a situation where demand, will be strong, and also, volumes of output and consumption, can rise, significantly on the back of, price stability. So this is where I think, the fiscal authority really has to focus on, because the monetary authority cannot do it alone. No doubt, we would see the monetary authority ensuring that liquidity flow in the financial system is somewhat suppressed to ensure that, it does not, fuel excess inflation in the economy. But the authority in that case cannot solve the problems around insecurity, for instance. So this is something that the fiscal authority has to do. When we have an improvement in security, of course, most likely we are going to see an improvement in food output, for instance. And when we see an improvement in output, ultimately you would expect either lower prices, or at least you will see, prices being stable. So I think going forward, the authorities should focus on ensuring, price stability for us to have, stable economic growth, or even better economic growth over the next couple of quarters. Investment is another very important element for consideration. In my mind, we should see more investment in infrastructure. The capital expenditure leg of the budget should be fully executed. When we have that, in place, I think we can be talking about a lot more robust economic growth over the next couple of quarters. I think all of those elements are important. The third element I will, bring to the table is FX rates. We have seen an improvement in the rate in terms of stability. We have also seen convergence, broadly speaking, between the official market rate and the parallel market rate. That has to be sustained for the most part of the next couple of quarters if we are looking for stronger economic growth. The stability we have seen should be sustained, number one. Number two, and possibly more importantly, the liquidity improvement that we have seen in the market should be sustained as well, because what that implies is that businesses that want to buy raw materials using FX can easily get FX in the FX market to import raw materials to produce their goods. All of these elements, in my mind, are very important for sustained growth or an improvement in the growth rate of the economy over the next couple of quarters.
Okay, so having said this, let's look at it from an external angle. I mean, we still see geopolitics at play and on the rise, and we also experience global trade tensions across the globe. Now, of course, we notice this, and we know that this can have some sort of impact on the domestic side of things in the country. Does it mean that Nigeria, in this position, as you have described, and the necessary things that should be put in place, is in a better stead to be insulated from whatever happens, of course, looking at the external shocks now?
So if we talk about external shocks, I think it is important to look at it from a sector standpoint. If we are looking at the oil sector, for instance, I reckon that, we are somewhat, protected, because we now have, local refineries, working, and, we have them working on the private sector side. We also have them working on the government side. So what that implies is that we are even better positioned to take advantage of any, kind of shocks in the global economy in terms of the oil sector, because most likely what we refine here in terms of crude oil, we will be able to export to other countries, which I reckon is something that Dangote is currently doing as a refinery, as we speak. So the second thing to my mind is that no doubt we will see some headwinds around the non-oil sector. And when we talk about tension in some key areas in Europe, all of that element can lift global commodity prices. Non-oil commodity prices, for instance, could be elevated in prices, and that could negatively affect us. But I think with backward integration, for instance, that some of the businesses in Nigeria have started, I think we are a bit somewhat protected on that front, but we are not completely protected. So we still have that risk around the non-oil sector in my view. So what that is one area that Nigerians, and I believe also the authorities should focus on, because we should be able to produce locally, consume locally, and limit the risk of external shocks to our economy. No doubt the non-oil sector is still exposed in that regard.
Ron, you spoke highly of the economic reforms of this administration. Would you put the rebasing of the CPI and the GDP within that mix as one of the magics that actually transformed the economy?
So honestly, I don't think that the rebasing of the CPI as really, or the GDP as really started in terms of the expected major impact on the economy, because we are reviewing Q4 2024, which is basically last year. So the rebasing of the CPI and the GDP will begin to see the impact this year. And I reckon that, for instance, for the CPI, we have started to see the impact, because we have seen a situation where we now have what we call market to economy interest rate transmission. By that I mean we have much lower yield in the market, which means much lower borrowing cost in the market relative to where we were last year. And that, largely speaking, is driven by inflation expectation, which the market is factoring in to be much lower compared to last year. So what that implies is that we are going to see much lower borrowing cost. When you have much lower borrowing cost in an economy, you most likely are going to see more businesses being emboldened to borrow for capital projects. And that is one thing that we believe will also underpin economic growth. So that is as far as the impact of the CPI rebasing is concerned. When we take a look at it at the GDP in terms of the rebasing, I think what the GDP will tell the entire world is that Nigeria is actually bigger than we currently see it, because it's going to capture a lot more of the activities in the informal sector. So when you have the informal sector being captured more, and you have new businesses that have come up being captured, it will give you a better picture around what the economic size is. And number two, more importantly, it will give a better picture to global investors around where can they invest in the Nigerian economy. And I think we can, on the back of that, attract more foreign direct investment into this country.
Okay, now the finance minister said the growth trajectory was supported by stabilizing inflation. You mentioned a couple of things that were done in that regards. Of course, of growing foreign reserves also to about $40 billion and in narrowing budget deficits. How true are these assertions, most particularly about the narrowing of the budget deficits?
So I'm not really convinced that the budget deficit has really narrowed, because when we look at the latest figure published by the authority, we have from January to August, we still have our the government missing its target in terms of revenue generation. So what that means is that the government really had to depend on borrowings. And on the back of that, we would expect the deficits to have been a lot larger than budgeted for by the government, unless if we are speaking about figures that have not been published. I mean, maybe they are looking at September to December, which we have not seen. But for January to August, the deficit is still much there, and it suggested that the government was somewhat relying on borrowing, and we really saw that materialize in the local capital markets, which to my mind is not necessarily a bad thing, but if those funds were invested and directed toward capital expenditure, I believe that all of us in the country will see the accretive impact it will have on the economy over the short to medium term. But in terms of the actual deficit really contracting, I have not seen such a figure as we speak.
And also, you talked about the fact that the Nigerian economy is growing and is even larger than what we had initially thought. But in 2024, Nigeria's GDP per capita was estimated to be between $824 and $877. Now, when you look at it, it's a huge drop from 2014 when we had about $3,220. So if the economy is improving, how come the per capita is declining? I just need your response about a minute.
Per capita would decline when you have huge devaluation of your naira. So the naira devaluation really was what was responsible for that per capita income decline. But when we look at it in terms of the naira, you would see that the per capita income really indeed improved, or at least stabilized compared to when you look at it from a dollar standpoint. If we have, and that is another reason that I said that we need currency or exchange rate stability. It is very important. No country can get away without ensuring that its currency is broadly stable and not experience enormous volatility. And we have sectors that were really underpinning this growth. We have the telecommunications sector, we have the financial services sector. Those two sectors were our superstars last year, particularly in the services sector. I think those are the areas to look at.
All right, thank you so much. Of course, I want to believe that Nigerians will be hoping that we will continue to see these growths. Maybe we can meet the $1 trillion economy pretty soon. Tajudeen Ibrahim, Director, Research and Strategy, Chapel Hill Denham Securities Limited, thank you so much for your time on the show.
Thank you for having me.